The first thing that hit us was the flicker in the hallway, a trembling glow that seemed to pulse like something alive trapped inside the bulb. And as we paused beneath it, the motel felt too quiet, as if the walls were waiting for us to make the wrong move. We should have turned back when the clerk whispered about room 9 in that shaky voice, but curiosity clawed at us, asking why a simple room needed warnings and what had happened to the people who ignored them before us. The air carried a damp smell that clung to our clothes, while each step toward the door made the silence heavier, until even our breathing sounded like an intrusion. A thin draft slipped from under the door, as if something inside was drawing in a slow, hungry breath. And when the knob twitched on its own just once, almost politely, we told ourselves it was only the wind, even though the night outside was still as stone. The door gave a soft creak as we leaned closer, a sound too controlled to be accidental, and even though we tried to steady our breaths, the air felt thick, like it was gathering around us. Something about the darkness under the door looked wrong, deeper than shadow, as if it swallowed the glow from the hallway instead of letting it fall across the floor. A faint scrape drifted from inside, slow and deliberate, followed by a hush so complete it felt pressed against our ears. We whispered to one another about turning back, but the moment we stepped away, the floor beneath us groaned like the building itself disagreed, its old boards settling with a weight that didn't match our footsteps. The silence returned with a pulse of warmth pushing from the other side, and for a second, I thought I heard breathing, steady and patient, waiting for us to make the next mistake. We pushed the door open just enough for a draft to slip out, carrying a stale scent mixed with something faintly metallic, and the room swallowed the hallway light as if refusing to share its corners. The curtains hung perfectly still, despite the cold air brushing past us, and a low tick echoed from the far side where the shadows seemed to shift without any movement to justify it. The air pressed tight around us, almost humming, and each step forward felt like crossing into a place that didn't want visitors. A question circled in my mind about what lived in the silence, and why the darkness seemed to breathe in slow rhythm. When the floor creaked behind us, though none of us had moved, we exchanged a look heavy with the fear that something else had come inside with us, something we had invited by simply opening the door. The lamp flickered twice and steadied with a sickly glow that stretched across the carpet in uneven strips, revealing stains we hadn't noticed at first. The room felt warped somehow, like the corners leaned inward, though the lines on the walls said otherwise. A soft tapping rose from behind the bathroom door, rhythmic and gentle, as if someone trapped inside was knocking with only the tips of their fingers. None of us wanted to name the sound, but it grew clearer with each tap, gaining weight until it echoed inside our chests. We whispered that it had to be the pipes, yet the timing was too calm, too purposeful, like someone waiting for us to answer. When the tapping stopped, replaced by a single slow drag across the floor, the air thickened, until I felt my heartbeat shift in my throat, as if urging me to run. The dragging sound faded, replaced by a hush so wide it seemed to swallow even the lamp's faint buzz, and for a moment, none of us dared speak. The bathroom door shifted an inch on its own, a slow, reluctant movement that revealed nothing but colder darkness, and the sight made my skin prickle as if something inside had leaned closer to listen. Mira reached for the switch near the wall, but before she touched it, a whisper slithered through the room, soft and broken like breath scraping against cracked lips. We froze as the air grew heavy enough to press on our shoulders, and I felt the strange pull of eyes in the dark, though I saw nothing. When the door creaked again without being touched, we realized that whatever waited inside wasn't hiding from us at all. It was inviting us, patient and sure we would answer. The moment we stepped deeper into the room, the air shifted, heavier and warmer, as if we had crossed an unseen line that sealed itself behind us. The lamp dimmed enough to blur the edges of the walls, and the dark corners seemed to pulse, like they were drawing breath from the stale air. A low hum rose beneath the floorboards, steady and patient, and the sense that we were no longer alone pushed into my chest with slow, deliberate weight. I tried to tell myself it was the old wiring, but the sound followed our steps like something beneath the floor was tracking us. A soft thud came from the bathroom again, Not a knock this time, but the sound of something settling into place. We glanced at each other, knowing that stepping backward felt impossible now, as if the room itself held us in its grip and waited for us to give it our full attention. A faint rustle drifted from the closet, so soft at first that we thought it was fabric shifting, but the sound grew sharper until it carried the weight of something brushing against wood. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears as I watched the thin line of darkness at the closet's base tremble like breath passing through it. Jonah whispered that it had to be an animal, but the scratching patterns were slow and deliberate, too measured to belong to anything frantic or wild. The air turned colder the closer we stepped toward it, and the old floorboard beneath Alex groaned like a warning. When Mira reached out to touch the closet handle, the room seemed to tighten around us, and the hum under the floor paused for one chilling second, as though waiting to hear what we would do next. The silence that followed felt sharper than the sound itself. The closet door opened without a sound, its movement smooth and slow, like it had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The darkness inside was deeper than the rest of the room, thick enough that the lamplight stopped at its threshold, as if afraid to enter. A faint whisper drifted out, too soft to form a word, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. We leaned in without meaning to, drawn by the pull of something hidden in that impossible dark. A sudden cold swept over us, pushing against our faces with the weight of unseen hands, and Mira stumbled back with a gasp that echoed through the room. The whisper came again, still shapeless but clearer, carrying the strange rhythm of a voice trying to form syllables it had forgotten. I felt the urge to shut the door, but something inside kept urging us closer. The whisper broke into a harsh scrape, like nails dragging across wood from somewhere deeper inside the closet, and the sound crawled along my spine with a slow, icy grip. Jonah stepped closer despite the tremor in his hands, muttering that he saw something shift, though none of us could see past the thick black inside. The air grew colder still, sinking around our legs and creeping up as if the room were filling from the floor upward. A sudden thump hit the back wall of the closet, so forceful the entire frame shuddered, and Mira cried out as the lamp flickered violently. The shadows stretched toward us as though pulled by the thump's echo, and for an instant I thought I saw movement deeper within, something low to the ground and crawling. We stumbled back together, realizing whatever hid in the dark was not trapped. It was trying to get out. The thumping ceased all at once, replaced by a slow shift of weight behind the wall, like something crawling along the inside of the motel's structure. The sound traveled upward in a steady, deliberate path, tracing a line toward the ceiling until settling overhead with a creak that made every nerve in my body tighten. Dust drifted down in small, lazy spirals as the ceiling boards flexed under the unseen pressure. We stared upward, afraid to move, as the shape above paced with soft, dragging motions, circling us in a slow, thoughtful loop. Then the floor beneath us answered with its own groan, as though something below had woken in response. For a moment, the room felt stretched between two unseen forces, one above, one below, closing around us with patient certainty. And in that smothering stillness, I realized the motel clerk's warning hadn't been a fear of the room itself, but of what lived behind it. The ceiling creaked once more, but this time the sound slid toward the far corner as though whatever moved above us was searching for a weak point to press through. The air thinned, turning sharp in my lungs, and a faint tremor pulsed under the soles of my shoes like the floorboards were reacting to the movement overhead. Mira whispered that we needed to leave, but the moment she spoke, the lamp dimmed again, its glow shrinking until the shadows rose up the walls, like tides closing in. A low vibration rippled through the room, humming with a strange rhythm that felt too steady to be random, almost like a heartbeat pushing through old wood. Jonah stepped toward the door, but the knob twitched before he reached it, turning with a slow, grinding motion that froze him in place. We felt the presence settle above us again, patient and aware, as if waiting to hear our next breath. The door rattled softly, not from anyone outside, but from a slow pressure pushing against it from the inside of the wood, as though something unseen traced its shape from behind the grain. Jonah backed away while Mira whispered that the room felt smaller. And she was right. The air pressed inward from every direction, carrying the faint scent of old damp earth. The floor groaned beneath us, shifting with small, sharp noises that reminded me of something dragging its weight through a narrow space. I heard a faint breath near my ear, quiet enough to doubt but cold enough to make me jerk away. The shadows near the bathroom thickened, forming a darker shape that seemed to pulse once, then sink back into the dimness. We all instinctively stepped together toward the center of the room, as though the darkness around the edges might swallow us if we stood too close. A sudden bang erupted from the wall beside the bed, forceful enough to shake dust loose and send a sharp jolt through my chest. The sound repeated twice, slower and heavier, as though something inside the wall struck it with deliberate intent. Jonah whispered that it was moving again, traveling inside the structure, and the thought twisted my stomach as I imagined something crawling through the spaces we could never reach. Another thud hit lower this time, dragging upward in a scraping line that made my teeth ache. Mira clamped her hands over her ears, trembling as the lamp flickered in frantic pulses. The thuds grew quieter but more controlled, almost like the thing was mapping out the room's borders, exploring every inch between floor and ceiling. When the final scrape ended in the corner behind us, the silence that followed felt wrong. The kind that meant the thing had stopped moving because it had found what it wanted. The corner behind us darkened further, swallowing the lamplight until the glow formed a tight circle around our feet, like a final safe zone shrinking on the carpet. A faint rustling rose from within that thick shadow, soft but steady, carrying the unsettling rhythm of something unfolding itself. The air cooled so abruptly my skin prickled, and I felt the pressure of unseen eyes studying us with patient interest. Jonah whispered our names in a trembling voice, as if counting us was the only thing grounding him. A thin draft pushed against my back, carrying the metallic scent we had noticed earlier, sharper now and cold enough to sting. The rustling stopped, replaced by a slow inhale, long and steady, coming from a height that suggested something tall stood inside the darkness. None of us dared turn fully toward it, because the breathing sounded close enough that turning might mean facing it directly. The breathing deepened, steady and heavy, and the darkness rippled as though something shifted its weight inside it. A faint outline appeared, too tall, too thin, swaying with slow, unnatural rhythm, and the sight made my throat tighten. Mira's hand found mine, cold and shaking, while Jonah muttered that we had to run, but the room felt sealed shut, every exit swallowed by shadow. The outline leaned forward, just enough to stretch into the lamplight, though its features remained hidden as if the light refused to reveal them. A scraping noise followed, like fingernails dragging across carpet, inching closer with patient intent. The lamp flickered twice, then steadied in a weaker glow, and in that moment the breathing stopped entirely. The sudden silence pressed in from all sides, thick and expectant, as though the shape had drawn closer and now waited for us to move first. I realized then that whatever it was, it wanted us to respond. The outline swayed once, then dissolved back into the dark as if sinking beneath a surface we could not see, and the room seemed to exhale in its absence. The air warmed only slightly, but the shift felt wrong, like something had slipped behind us rather than vanished. Jonah whispered that it might be moving through the walls again, and the floor answered with a soft tremor that pulsed under our shoes. The lamp dimmed to a weak ember glow, shrinking the safe circle around us, and the silence tightened until even breathing felt too loud. A soft hum rose from the bathroom, low and steady, almost like a distant tune played on broken pipes. Mira shook her head, insisting no sound that calm belonged here, and the hum grew clearer as if responding. The walls pressed inward with an invisible weight, and I felt certain we were being drawn towards something waiting in that quiet song. The hum in the bathroom shifted into a wavering note that rose and fell like a fragile voice trying to steady itself. The air near the doorway felt colder, pushing against our skin in slow pulses, each one timed with the rising pitch of the sound. Jonah whispered that maybe something was trapped inside, but the idea only made my chest tighten, because the sound carried a calm too controlled to belong to anything afraid. Mira stepped closer despite her trembling hands, drawn by a pull neither of us could name. The light wavered again, bending toward the bathroom as though drawn by the same strange force. The humming softened into something like breathing, slow and measured, and the cold deepened until my teeth ached. When a soft tap echoed from the tiled floor inside, we all froze, certain it was not asking for help but inviting us to listen closer. Mira reached the doorway and paused, her hand hovering above the frame as the humming faded into a soft crackle, like static moving across tile. The darkness inside the bathroom seemed deeper than before, thick and shifting, swallowing the faint glow from behind us. The crackle stopped, replaced by a slow drip of water that echoed with unnatural clarity, each drop falling with a pause that felt deliberate. Jonah whispered that the sink had been dry earlier, and the thought made my skin prickle, as I imagined something standing in the dark, dripping steadily onto the tile. A faint breath brushed past my cheek, cold enough to steal a gasp from me, though no one stood close enough to cause it. Mira called out a shaky hello, and the drip stopped instantly, replaced by silence so sharp it felt poised to break. We leaned in without meaning to, waiting for whatever would answer. A sudden splash erupted inside the bathroom, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling and send a jolt of fear through my chest. Mira stumbled backward as the sound spread in ripples, echoing too long for such a small space. Jonah whispered that he saw movement, but before I could ask where, the drip returned. Only now it came from the ceiling above us rather than the bathroom floor. We looked up together, dread climbing our spines as a single drop fell, hitting the carpet with a darkening spot that spread more like ink than water. The ceiling creaked as if something crawled along its beams, dragging heavy limbs in a slow, cruel rhythm. The air turned almost metallic, thick with the same scent from earlier, sharper now, and impossible to ignore. Another drop fell, then another, each one landing exactly between our feet, like a warning placed with intent. The dripping quickened, forming a slow rhythm that pulsed through the room like a heartbeat, growing more certain of itself. The ceiling bowed further, the wood straining under a weight too heavy to imagine, and the glow from the lamp dimmed to almost nothing, leaving us trapped in a haze of shifting shadows. Jonah grabbed my arm, urging us toward the door, but before we moved, the entire ceiling shuddered as something large pressed against it from above. Mira cried out as a long crack split across the boards, widening with a drawn-out groan that felt almost like a stretched whisper. Dust poured down, swirling through the weak light in frantic spirals. We backed toward the far wall, instinct telling us to stay out of the falling path. Then, in a sudden stillness that felt rehearsed, the pressure stopped completely, and the silence that followed told me the thing above was no longer trying to break through. It was changing its approach. The ceiling settled into an eerie stillness, but the air around us thickened with a slow pressure that felt like being watched from every angle. Jonah whispered that it had moved, and the room seemed to confirm it as a faint vibration crawled along the walls, circling us like a slow patrol. The lamp flickered once, then steadied into a weak glow that made every shadow lean inward. A soft tap sounded from the closet door, gentle and rhythmic, almost like a patient knock. Mira shook her head, muttering that it couldn't be inside both the ceiling and the closet, yet the tapping grew clearer, joined by a dull scrape that echoed behind the wall near the bathroom. The movements weren't frantic anymore. They were calm and certain, as though the thing had mapped every inch of the room and now moved through it with purpose. I felt the realization settle cold in my stomach. It wasn't searching. It was surrounding us. The tapping on the closet stopped abruptly, replaced by a low groan from the wall beside the bed, as if something inside the structure pushed against it. The wood dipped inward, swelling for a moment before easing back, and the sight turned my legs to ice. Mira whispered that we had to get out, and Jonah twisted the doorknob, but it refused to turn as though fused in place. The air near the door grew colder, carrying the same soft hum we heard earlier from the bathroom, only now it vibrated through the metal of the knob, pulsing under Jonah's hand. The walls shifted with slow creaks, settling into a pattern that felt almost like footsteps moving behind them. We pressed together, realizing the room wasn't just reacting. It was funneling us toward the center, tightening its invisible grip. The hum deepened, slow and steady, and the door felt farther away with every second. A sudden sharp crack split the silence, erupting from the far corner where the ceiling met the wall, and dust rained down in thin streams that drifted like falling ash. The crack widened, stretching across the plaster with a slow tearing sound that made my stomach twist. Jonah stepped back fast, pulling us with him, but the shadows near the crack shifted first, rippling like something inside was pushing its way closer to the surface. Mira covered her mouth as a low breath seeped through the opening, cold and steady, the same breath that had brushed past us earlier. The crack pulsed once, as though reacting to our movement, and I felt a horrible certainty settle over me that the thing was no longer content to lurk behind the walls. The room held its breath with us, waiting for the crack to widen just enough for whatever pressed against it to finally emerge. Before the crack could widen further, the bathroom door swung shut with a violent slam that shook the entire room. The sound echoed through the floor, vibrating up our legs and rattling the lamp. Mira cried out as the shadows near the bathroom stretched outward, reaching in long tendrils across the carpet like spreading ink. Jonah stepped in front of us instinctively, but the air thickened with a cold so sharp it stole the warmth from our skin. A whisper seeped through the bathroom door, low and distorted, forming no words yet carrying a rhythm that felt almost conversational. The temperature dropped again and my breath turned visible, drifting toward the closed door as if drawn in. The whisper paused, and the silence that followed felt like the moment before. Something breathes out. We stood frozen, certain that whatever hid inside was no longer waiting. It was calling to us. The whisper resumed with a deeper tone, vibrating through the walls until the bed frame rattled behind us. Jonah reached for the lamp, desperate for more light. But the instant his hand brushed it, the bulb flared white and burst, plunging the room into a suffocating dimness. Mira gasped as darkness surged in from every corner, bending around us like a closing net. The crack in the ceiling glowed faintly, not with light but with motion, as if the darkness inside it churned. A soft scrape rose from behind the bathroom door, slow and rhythmic, moving downward toward the floor. The doorknob twisted once, gently, almost politely, and we stumbled back in terror. When the knob released and the door creaked open an inch, a wave of cold air spilled out, carrying the unmistakable sound of breathing. Steady, aware, and impossibly close. Whatever had been circling us was finished waiting. It was stepping into the room. Chihuahua. The cold air from the bathroom rolled across the carpet in slow waves, brushing our ankles like something crawling past us, and the darkness beyond the cracked door seemed to pulse with its own faint breath. Jonah whispered for us to stay together, but his voice shook so hard it barely carried, and Mira clung to my arm as if the room were tilting under our feet. The door eased open another inch on its own, spilling a deeper shadow that swallowed what little light remained. A soft scrape drifted from the tiled floor inside, dragging in calm, steady strokes that made every hair on my arms rise. The sound wasn't urgent. It was patient, measured, as though whatever hid inside knew we had nowhere left to run. The walls groaned in answer, tightening around us with a pressure that felt almost like hands closing in. I sensed we were moments from seeing what had been following us. The scraping inside the bathroom deepened, shifting into a dragging sound that circled the small space with slow, careful steps. Our breaths turned visible, drifting forward as if pulled toward the opening. Jonah whispered that it was moving closer to the door, but we didn't need to be told. The darkness thickened until it looked like it pressed against the frame from the inside. Mira stepped back as the sound stopped completely, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed into my ears. Then a soft tap landed on the tile, right at the threshold, spaced with a rhythm that felt almost like a slow beckoning. The draft grew stronger, colder, carrying the scent of old earth and something metallic. I felt the instinct to run, but the room shifted with a creak that made the exit feel impossibly far away. We stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, waiting for the next sound. The tap repeated, this time lighter and closer, followed by a faint shuffle that brushed the edge of the threshold. The darkness shifted, and for a moment I thought I saw the shape of fingers curling along the floor, stretching into the light before slipping back. Mira gasped and pressed into my side, her breath shaking against my arm. Jonah whispered something I couldn't understand, his voice tight and breaking as he stared into the dark. A low inhale drifted from within, long and slow, as if the thing inside had drawn our scent into its lungs. The air felt heavier with every breath, and the shadows around our feet thickened like they were spreading across the carpet. The darkness beyond the door swelled with movement, something rising from the floor to a height that felt impossibly tall. We stepped back together, trembling, knowing we were seconds away from seeing it step through. The shadow inside shifted again, rising with a slow, deliberate motion that made the doorframe seem too small to contain what moved. The scrape of weight against tile deepened, louder and closer, echoing through the room like a warning from something that never needed to rush. Jonah muttered that it was coming out, and the words barely left his mouth before a low exhale drifted through the crack, brushing across our faces like cold fingertips. The carpet rippled beneath us as if reacting to the breath, and the walls clicked softly with settling sounds that matched the slow rhythm of whatever approached. Mira squeezed my arm so hard I felt her nails through my sleeve. The darkness stretched forward in a long, thin shape that twitched like testing the air. I felt the room pulse once with a pressure that made my ears ring, and dread crawled up my spine as the shadow lurched 1 inch closer to crossing the threshold. The moment the shadow touched the edge of the carpet, the lamp behind us flickered once, then steadied, its dim glow trembling like it feared the darkness about to enter. The shape lifted higher, forming an outline too thin, too long, bending forward in a way that made my stomach clench. A soft crack sounded, like joints shifting after years of stillness. Jonah whispered that we had to move, but the air had thickened into something that held us in place. The figure leaned into the weak light just enough to show the faintest suggestion of movement beneath the shadow, as though its surface writhed with slow, deliberate life. A deep inhale filled the room, rattling the window as if the breath belonged to the walls themselves. The door behind us gave a soft click, sealing shut without being touched. The shape paused, poised between shadow and light, waiting, inviting us to take 1 step closer so it could finish crossing into our world. The figure hovered at the threshold, its outline bending in slow ripples as if deciding how to move next, and the air tightened with a weight that pushed against our chests. Jonah whispered that we needed to run, but the door behind us stayed sealed, its edges swallowed by thick shadow that seemed to pulse in time with the creature's slow breaths. Mira trembled against me as the figure leaned forward, stretching into the weak light until its shape flickered like heat haze. A soft click echoed through the room, not from the creature but from somewhere deep inside the walls, followed by a low vibration that rolled under the floorboards. The shadows near the corners thickened, gathering as though drawn toward the thing stepping out. I felt the room shift with a quiet groan, the air tightening around us until every breath tasted of dust and coal. It wasn't just approaching, it was claiming the room around us. The figure drifted forward in a slow glide, its movement silent yet heavy enough to bend the air around it, and the shadows behind it stretched like long fingers reaching for our ankles. Jonah grabbed my shoulder, urging us backward, but the room seemed to shrink with every step we took, the walls groaning as though pushed from the outside. Mira let out a broken whisper, begging the thing to stop, though her voice was barely more than a breath. The figure paused at the center of the room, its outline rippling in slow waves that made my vision blur. A cold pulse swept outward from its body, raising goosebumps across my arms and stealing the warmth from my lungs. The floor vibrated with a deep hum that matched the rhythm of its breath, and for one terrifying moment, I felt as though the room itself inhaled with it. Something inside that shape stirred, shifting with purpose. The hum deepened, vibrating through the wall so strongly that the lamp rattled in its socket, and the figure tilted its head in a sharp motion that made a cold shock run through me. Mira gasped as the shadows around its feet thickened, rising in slow tendrils as if preparing to coil upward. Jonah stepped forward with shaking legs, shouting at the thing to stay back, but the shadow tendrils surged toward him with a sudden snap, stopping only inches from his shoes. He stumbled away, and the figure's shape bent as though following his movement, responding to fear like a scent. The ceiling creaked again, answering with a sound that traveled across the beams like something enormous shifting above. I felt the urge to scream, but the weight in the air pressed my voice down. The figure leaned closer, bending toward us with a slow, deliberate purpose, as though tasting the fear filling the room. The shadows surged once more, splitting across the carpet like cracks in ice, and a low breath rolled through the room that felt more like a warning than an attack. Jonah called my name with a shaking voice, pointing toward the door as the knob twitched, not from us, but as if something outside pushed against it. For a second, hope sparked in my chest that maybe someone had heard us, but the figure reacted first, snapping its head toward the sound in a sharp motion that made the shadows ripple violently. The knob twisted again, slower this time, and Mira clutched my arm as the air pulsed with a pressure that felt like the walls were pulling inward. The figure drifted toward the door, its body stretching long and thin, blocking the last hint of escape. The hum inside the walls rose, vibrating through my bones. Something on the other side knocked. Soft, slow, deliberate. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the room with a hollow tone that made my chest tighten. The figure froze, its shape bending unnaturally, as though torn between us and whatever waited on the other side of the door. Mira whispered a plea I could barely hear, and Jonah grabbed my arm, urging us back before the room shifted again. The door rattled as something outside pushed harder, causing the wood to strain inward, and for a moment I thought it might burst open. The figure turned sharply, its entire form collapsing into itself before stretching toward the knocking with sudden violent speed. The hum inside the walls peaked, and the shadows surged up the doorframe in a wave. Then everything fell silent. The door stopped shaking. The figure halted mid-motion, and the air went still enough to press against my skin like ice. The room held its breath, waiting for the next impossible moment to happen.